Welcome to Mom's Writers Club. I am Jessica,
And I'm Sarah.
and today we have a special guest with us. It is Peyton Roberts. Hi, Peyton.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to be
Yeah,
here.
thank you for joining us. Before we get started, if you could please give us a quick like and subscribe, it helps us reach other authors like yourself. I'm going to talk a little bit about Peyton now. Peyton is a writer, mom, and military spouse who grew up sewing dresses on the sunny Gulf Coast. Her extensive travels studying abroad, leading mission trips, and living overseas on Guam forged a passion for writing and speaking about social impact causes. She holds a BA in business from the University of Florida and a master's in communication from San Diego State. Peyton enjoys sailing, cooking, and exploring nature with her family wherever the Navy sends them. Peyton, we're so excited to have you join us. And thanks for doing it on kind of quick notice.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love the Moms Writers Club. It's been my absolute favorite thing about Twitter. And so
Oh, yay.
getting to
Yeah,
be
me
part of
too.
this discussion is just great to share what I've learned.
So today we are going to talk a little bit about what Peyton's book launch was like, the publicity and marketing around that, and we can dig a little bit into that topic, a little deeper into that topic. But Peyton, could you start out just by telling us a little bit about your writing journey and about your book? And I know it came out last year, and we'd love to hear more about it.
Sure. So my novel, Beneath the Seams, it's a mother-daughter story about the dark side of the global fashion industry. I started writing it 4 years ago, just as basically uh, as a mom writer during nap times and preschool hours, and but I'd been inspired to write this story to kind of talk about my sewing to then fast fashion to then a sustainable fashion journey. So that was what inspired the book, and I just started writing every day during nap times, and then next thing I know, I had a full manuscript. Next thing you know, it took 2 years, and then another full year to find a publisher and get it ready to launch. So it just came out in May, and it's been a really exciting time.
That's wonderful. And I think it's also so inspiring for our moms to hear that, because I think it's so hard, so easy to kind of get stuck in your head and like even kind of in your house and you're like, yep, I'm writing, but is this ever going to go anywhere? So yes, it really can. And you're a great example of that. We would love to hear a little bit about your book launch. You mentioned it, I think, on our last Moms Writers Club chat, our Wednesday night chats, and I was asking a bunch of questions, and I think a lot of us came to the conclusion that this would make a great episode. And so you said you were with a smaller press. So can you kind of just tell us whatever you think is
Sure.
yes, go for
Yeah,
it.
I will briefly share about my journey to find a publisher
Yeah.
unfolded unexpectedly. I ended up participating in a pitch party on Twitter. It was Faith Pitch. I wasn't specifically writing a Christian book, but my book fit that market, and that's my background and my worldview. So I went ahead and went for it, and I ended up finding a publisher within 3 weeks of that pitch contest. They offered me a
Wow.
contract, and they had had a book fall off of their schedule, and so they offered me a May publication date, which was only 6 months away at that point.
That is
So
so fast.
the reason I share that is because my launch went really fast, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for anyone. Now that I've been through the launch process and see how much time each step takes, it really felt like I was sprinting the whole time. But there were some personal reasons why I really wanted that timeline. Specifically, our family was at a duty station where I knew my husband was going to be there and he wasn't going to be deployed. And so I knew if we launched this book here, he will be here for this milestone. So that was really important to
Yeah.
me. And I think, a lot of writers will find uh, it feels like a really long time once you finally get that publication date, but it's for the best,
Yeah.
especially if it's your first book. There is so much to do that I just didn't know until I was knee deep in it. So I think you could really probably title this whole episode "What I Wish I Had Known About Launching a Book," because I learned a
Oh,
lot.
well, that's perfect because we're always
There we
looking
go.
for
Thank
episode
you. I'm always
titles.
like, what should we call it? We got it.
Well, so we're like both kind of fascinated by this because Jess and I are on opposite ends of that time spectrum. So Jess's book publishes in May.
In May, and from when I was offered my contract, that'll be about 10 months. So it is a very fast release, and I can't imagine doing it in 6 months because like I've been busy editing with my editor this whole time, and now I'm about like 3 to 4 months out, and like things are really moving, and that I feel like it's been really fast. So I can't imagine doing it even faster.
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah.
And
And
yours
then
is how long?
my book is a release date of March 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And we signed the contract in, I mean, we basically had the deal in like May or June of last year. I mean, it takes forever to actually like sign a contract, but I knew this
Mm-hmm.
was going to happen May or June last year. Um, so like I've got the luxury of time, but then that's the luxury of overthinking also.
Yeah, it's difficult because there are so many things that you really can't do until the book exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so it is nice to have all the time that you have to really be strategic about kind of how you want to spend that time once the book is here.
Knowing that your book was going to publish in 6 months, did you immediately start thinking about what kind of publicity and marketing you were going to do? How did you approach that? And what was your timeline like?
So I had a lot to do. Basically, I was working back and forth with my editor in 2 to 3 week sessions. I'd have the book and then she'd have the book. And basically, whenever my editor had the book, I was getting ready for the launch. I was doing everything from I was starting an email list for the first time. I was starting an author Instagram and a author Facebook page for the first time. All things that I honestly was kind of dreading. And in fact, my character, Shelby, in my book, she's launching her fashion business and is doing all this social media stuff. And I remember when I was writing those scenes, I was just thinking, if this book actually goes somewhere, I'm going to have to do all of this. All of the marketing and social media in general has the real potential to get overwhelming very quickly, especially if, like me, you're a small press author and you don't have a ton of formal support through your publisher for marketing and publicity. So, really, like, it was on me to do the lion's share of the work to get the word out about the book. And so, there were certain it was just a realization up front that I would not be able to do everything, and so I'd have to really be strategic about where I wanted to focus my time. So for me, as soon as the book was done and fully edited, I focused my efforts on asking other authors for blurbs because that takes so much time, and also
Mm-hmm.
on building a launch team. And the launch team really ended up being the heart of success for Beneath the Seams. Um, I'll just cut to the chase and say that in my first week of sales with pre-orders, the book sold over 1,000 copies,
Woo!
which that's
That's
peanuts
wonderful.
compared to a big press, and certainly nowhere, to get me on the bestseller lists. But it was
No, but
the
that's
number one new
significant.
release in Amazon, and I felt
Yeah.
very satisfied
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a big
with
deal.
that. And it really was down to my book launch team pounding the pavement for me.
Can you tell us more about the launch team? Like, can you take us step by step in forming one for anyone who wants to do one, and like how many people you had and what things you did with your launch team that made it successful for you?
Yes. So the advice that I had I talked to a few people that were book launch managers, and they
Mm-hmm.
said there was kind of the sweet spot of 75 to 80 members that that is ideal. That was kind of my target number going in. So I created a Google form that had information about my book, what it was about, and what was expected of launch team members, which was basically being willing to read the book by a deadline, review the book, and share about the book. Pretty simple. And so I sent that link to people in my life who I knew would support me no matter what and who were excited to be part of this milestone for me. The other group of people I sent the link to were people who uh, probably owed me a favor back. And most of those people were very enthusiastic. So I think thinking in your life about where have I done things for others, and those might be good people to ask to join your launch
Yeah.
team.
How did you approach people about it? Did you just like shoot them a text? Did you email? Like, what did
Yes,
you
I
do?
think the more one-on-one you can be with your ask to be on the launch team, the the better the success rate. And I think that's true too of asking people to join your email list.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think reaching out individually for an ask is just a lot more personal, and I think it makes people feel really like you specifically want them to be part of the launch. And I did specifically want each of these people, but it was just easier to throw the link out to a group text that already existed.
Yeah.
And that also, that did give people an opportunity to not participate if it just wasn't something that they wanted to do or had time to do. Then if they didn't fill out the form, then they weren't part of the launch team, and that was fine, no hard feelings. But a lot of people enthusiastically filled it out and did more than the minimum for the launch team. So,
That's fantastic.
so
Um,
after that, it was a matter of reading the information people had submitted about how to communicate. So I got everyone's social media lists, social media names. But what I
mhm.
discovered is that half my launch team was on Instagram and half of them were on Facebook. So I ended up communicating solely by email. And about once a week, I would send out an email that would have very specific action items for people
Mm.
to do.
So you had them doing something like once a week, like for 2 months or the week of, or what?
So it was probably about a 8 week period leading up to the launch day, and the first 6 weeks of it was read the book. Are you reading the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I set up a launch team Zoom call for 3 weeks before the release of the book. And that was to give everyone, number one, a deadline to read the book by, because we were going to talk about the book. And also, it was an opportunity for me to practice talking about the book.
Mm.
That's a great
Hmm.
idea.
So up until that
I know.
point,
Taking notes.
maybe you can both relate to this. Um, I had really been in a writing cave, and just writing and editing and writing and editing. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm going to have to talk about these characters and this story and these themes.
Yeah.
So that was
That
something
takes
that
practice.
it does
Yeah.
take practice.
It's a big transition to be able to eloquently state what your book is about, and what's important about your book and what people need to know. And it's so different. So Peyton, you said that when we were talking about it earlier, that a lot of like the launch team is about building your launch is about building relationships. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yes. So one thing I would recommend for authors is to sit with your book long before your launch starts, or as your launch is starting, and think about kind of what your overall strategy is going to be for this book. And the reason I say that is I really got in the weeds of suddenly, the book's coming out in 6 weeks, and I'm emailing media and I'm following up with authors about blurbs and reaching out to the launch team. And it was really easy to kind of get lost in all of the tasks that needed to happen.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my mom, and um, she really helped me to kind of clarify what the whole purpose of this was. There's a lot of ways that you can strategize your launch, and she helped me come up with my launch was about building relationships. So before starting any new task, I would ask myself, how does this email build relationships? How does
Mm.
this podcast interview build relationships? And so that for me was really helpful to take the focus off of selling the book and
Mm.
put the
Mhm.
focus on the author reader relationship, which ultimately is really what you want out of the
Oh, I
launch, is
love
to
that.
connect with
Yeah.
readers.
That's a much more comfortable space to occupy too, just as a human being and as a creative person, rather than like I'm selling something. I'm suddenly in this uncomfortable, like I'm selling something space. Um, that's a very natural place to move into from that like solitary, like author book space that you're in, to kind of like move yourself out into the author reader relationship. That's great. I love that.
It's been really helpful. One of my critique partners like just published her debut last May, and her second book is coming out like a week away from my debut. And it's been kind of cool to watch her because I feel like she's done such a fantastic job. And for her, it's been building relationships as well, with readers, but also with like bookstagrammers and other authors. And she's made so many friends doing it. And they're real friendships. They're not just like, I scratch your back and you scratch mine.
Cross
Like they
promotion
actually,
kind of stuff. Yeah.
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 And that's been like a really great model to kind of get to see and like get ideas for like what I can do that's similar, because I really like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really, it has a lot of echoes of like Jane Friedman's whole take on book marketing. I don't know if you've read her stuff. She's a fantastic book called The Business. Was it Business of Being a Writer or something?
I think so. Yeah.
And she's really heavy on the like what are you giving to others, and what are you, it's not about selling, but it's about, creating relationships and creating something of value that, will make other people's lives better.
For sure. I think it's worth noting too that, I mean, you can make your book launch about growing your email list. You can make your book launch about entertaining your audience.
Right.
There are a lot of strategies depending on the book. And
Yeah.
I think there's a point where there was a point when I was kind of casting lines out to authors for blurbs and podcasters to be on their show, and to the media, and I was getting no's and no's and no's and a yes here and there, and I started paying attention to the yeses and the patterns, and I realized there are certain places this book wants to be, and there are certain places this book does not want to be. And so I started to listen a little bit more to the heart of the story and to where the book apparently has a preference, I think.
That's
So
cool. I like that.
it's like a
That's cool.
toddler during the launch, and then release day, it's like sending it off to college.
It's true
Right.
though. I mean, because one thing I think about, so I've been pitching podcasts the last month or two, and I try to think about how I can benefit the podcaster and the audience that listens to that podcast. And if I don't think I can, then I don't usually send like a pitch letter. But if I can like think of a way that, like, if I've been listening to their podcast and can think of a way that I fit in, or that my book fits in well with what they're talking about, and where I have like an interesting topic, I feel like that has been really helpful. And that's when I've gotten yeses, is when it seems that it serves their audience, and
Right. Earlier you said, you dreaded setting up like an author Facebook page and an author Instagram and stuff like that. How did you look at it before it happened, when you were dreading it? And like, how do you look at it now?
I think what I dreaded before was just kind of stepping out into the spotlight, which you really have to do if you want your book to shine. Like you are the story as much as the story is. People are buying the book because of you as much as they are because the story speaks to them in a lot of ways. And so I think stepping out into the spotlight felt very uncomfortable for me. I've always used social media to keep in touch with friends and family. So suddenly having to use it for a different purpose felt unnatural. I think
Mm.
if I had started earlier with my writing journey of being more public about my writing and really owning that writer identity, it would have been a much easier transition to, oh yeah, and now here's this book that I've been working on, instead of just kind of showing up like, oh, here's me and my book.
Right. Right.
So I think I dread, and like I'm sure everyone does to some extent, just dreading what's the feedback going to be once readers actually get this in mass. Are they going to love it as much as I do?
Mhm.
And so there's just this anxiousness about how is the book going to be received, and is all of this time and energy going to be worth it?
Mhm.
So those were some of the things that I was dreading, and honestly, looking back on the launch, I am so happy with the way everything went. I am so grateful for the people in my life who stepped up to help spread the word. I'm also really grateful for all of the new writing friendships that
Mhm.
emerged through the launch, through the writers that joined the launch team, who I got to know intimately through that, and so it ended up being an incredibly worthwhile experience, though exhausting, and one that I would love to do again at some point, but not right away.
If so, like moving forward, what would you do differently next time?
What I wish I had known that I will incorporate for next time is that, you know, this this book launch, I put a lot of pressure on myself that it was the book launch. It was
Mhm.
my debut, and you only get one debut, right? I think if I had approached it as a book launch, it wouldn't have felt
Mm,
like every task was so urgent and so important,
right.
and it wouldn't have felt like every ask was so important.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I wish I had done differently. I would have invited everyone to join my book launch team. I would have put it out the invitation on my personal Facebook page, and I wish that I had done that because that would have allowed so many more people to be a part of launching the book and spreading the word. And at the end of the day, my book sold because of word of mouth. It sold because people on my book launch team spread the word through their Facebook pages and through their church groups and through their book club, and that's what made my book reach readers, was through my book launch team. So I would say the more the merrier. I don't think
That's
80
awesome.
is, yeah, and it wouldn't have been any extra work for me to email more people every week.
Right.
So it would have, yeah.
It
So
seems
that's
like once you sort of recruit your whole team, then you're addressing them as a group. Like maybe you're sending a lot of individual texts and emails at first to assemble everybody, but then you're like, okay, we're all here, you know?
the other thing that I learned that was so eye-opening to me was, the pre-order period is such an important time for getting people's attention and their excitement level. And on book launch day, on my release day, and all these people are getting their books and they're so excited and they're texting me, and I was just like, they're really excited about this book that they haven't read. Like they've bought this thing that they haven't experienced yet, and they're excited about it. And it was like, what did that? And it really made me see that you're not selling a book, you're not selling a story, you're selling an idea of how you're going to make people feel.
Mm.
And I think that was something that I had known. And then suddenly it became abundantly clear why the hook and the premise of a story is so exciting, because
Yeah.
it's the idea of how someone's going to feel after reading your book.
Mm. Hmm. I was going to ask, is there anything that you chose not to do? Were you like, I could do this thing, but I'm not gonna?
Yes, as a mom of two kids, one of which was in preschool for only 3 hours a day, there were a lot of things that I just couldn't do. I didn't do any of the Goodreads promotions or BookBub. I joined and did the bare minimum there, but I didn't take advantage of a lot of those portals to reach readers directly.
Hmm.
I also didn't do any advertising on Amazon and Facebook. I really didn't set up a good long term marketing plan because I knew right after the book launch we were moving. And
Hmm.
so that's something I would definitely recommend writers think about, is what's your long game, because I didn't really have one, and it's been
Long
hard.
game as in like for this book or like for your career?
I think a long game for this book.
Yeah.
So I had a really great pre-order and first month sales, and then
Mm.
sales really dropped, and I didn't feel like I had my footing on a strategic plan for keeping getting the word out about the book.
Right, right.
And not being in bookstores as a small press book, and not being on those big publicity lists of best read, or I it's really been on me to do all of that. And so I just feel like I've maybe left some opportunities on the table if I'd thought
Mm-hmm.
about it in advance and put things in place ahead of
I
time.
think I think it's hard for people to like, it would have never occurred to me to think about a month after release. And the only reason like I put any thought into it is because people have said exactly what you said, as far as like, great, you've scheduled podcasts around the time of your release, but what about a month or two after your release? And whether it's marketing like Facebook and Instagram, or however you can kind of try to keep that buzz going, which I think is
Right.
a whole challenge in and of itself, and
But
publishers
after
vary
the
so much.
book release, you have the book, which is such a huge game changer. I think you said earlier, I mean, there's just stuff that you can't do until you actually have the book. So that gives you an opportunity to kind of try and do a whole new list of things with your copious spare time.
So you have a history in doing public speaking, but you recommended brushing up ahead of interviews and such things. Can you tell us more about that?
So I will clarify that I love to write and I don't love speaking as much. And so when I was getting my master's degree, I opted to teach public speaking at the college level because I knew it was a skill that I needed to work on. And
Good
so
for you.
I've learned a lot about public speaking. I have since taught public speaking at a local university as adjunct faculty, and it was mostly with selfish motives of improving a skill that doesn't come naturally to me. And so I think one of the reasons that I was also dreading the book launch was because I knew I was really rusty. I see public speaking as a lot knowing a foreign language, where if you don't use it regularly, you you lose your fluency a little bit.
Mm.
And so it definitely, I would encourage authors as you're scheduling these podcast interviews and media interviews, you know, practice. Yeah, it's so important to know what you're going to say when someone asks you, what is your book about?
So Sarah has been torturing me by making me give my talk about my book over and over via recorded message, and I really appreciate that, actually. And it's
And
been really helpful. I've gotten much better at it.
I
But
know
in
she did it like 5
addition,
times yesterday, and it got so much better so fast,
it really did. And it was nice because she could point out, like, but you missed this whole thing that's like so important about your book. And one of the things I loved about it. So like that was really helpful. And
And
then
it's
one of
easy
the
to
other
like
things,
start sounding rehearsed too,
yeah, it
and then
is,
you
which I
lose that
definitely have.
sense of like, oh my God, I'm super excited about this book. Like, I love this book.
The other thing that I have found, for anyone listening to this, is most podcasters will give you the questions ahead of time if you ask for them, which is so nice, because it's not that I like have to rehearse every single question, but sometimes they ask questions that you're like, I kind of need to think about that for a second. And it feels very awkward to do it when you're like actually recording with them. So anyone who's listening who plans on doing podcasts, I would recommend at least asking. Worst they'll say is no. So it sounds like you did quite a few podcasts. How do you recommend people find podcasts?
Listening to podcasts early on in your writing journey, that and finding those shows that you connect with on a personal level as a listener is a really great way to start growing your idea of who you might want to pitch when it's your turn to launch your book. I didn't do that. So in my 6-month launch, I just researched through searching the podcast apps. What were some of the low hanging fruit that seemed to be a good fit for my book, and then researching. What I found is that my small press book wasn't. It just wasn't competitive to be on the big podcasts, and that was okay. The yeses that I got were from smaller startup, mostly book club related podcasts, and those were great. I had wonderful discussions, and it got my book in front of a new audience that I wouldn't have reached on my own through my book launch team, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I think researching podcasts for me was not done as strategically as I would have liked, but it was still well worth the time. Jessica, how have you been reaching out?
It's definitely been a lot of like the podcasts I love and reaching out to them, and again, just trying to pitch it in a way that I think will appeal to their listeners, or that will serve their listeners. Like pitching a writing podcast, I try to talk about like parts of my writing journey that I think might be interesting to the listeners of that podcast. Whereas like there's a like a bookish one I'm going to be pitching soon. And there are like themes in my book that I could see would be like good discussion points for them. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but just kind of listening to the podcast first, at least a few episodes, and getting an idea of what their format is like and what they would potentially be looking for has been what's worked best for me. And I've gotten like a decent number of yeses. I need to send out a lot more pitches. But you mentioned graphic design. What did you have to say about that?
I think it's just another category that as an author writing a book, I didn't realize that I would need a plan for coming up with graphics for especially Instagram. So around the time of the book launch, I thankfully had already had in place, I put together some quote cards. I actually had an intern that helped me to design some templates for quote cards. And on that last round of editing, one of the things I did was highlight kind of the quotable quotes from the book and pull those out and have
That's
them
so
ready
smart.
to go for quote cards. So I would say with graphic design, the more things you can have all ready to go in the pipeline that you're, can naturally talk about in the caption, the better.
You're really validating something that we said in our episode on. Remember when we did our episode on author platform? And we're like, a lot of people are like, why do I need a website? Like I haven't published anything yet, and or how do I need? Why do I need a platform like it? There's not even anything. I don't even have a book yet, And part of our answer is practice. Like you can like work out the kinks in anonymity, and then when you do have a book to launch, then you've already got a little bit of a structure in place. You maybe know at least what your website looks like, or so it sounds similar with the book, where to me it feels very theoretical still. I mean, and I don't have a cover, I don't have even really a for sure title yet, so I'm going to need to know those things. But even though it still feels very theoretical, like I could go find quotes, I could think about what I want that to look like on my social media. Like I could sort of get the bones in place.
I think this far out for you too, it's really good to start watching what other authors are doing, or what some authors are doing that like actually does catch your attention or does appeal to you, especially other authors in your genre. And I've been trying to do that with thrillers and suspense novels, and you can learn a lot just by kind of like engaging that part of your brain where you're like, I'm gonna have to do this someday.
Right.
What
let
what
me
works.
Notice. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about coordinating with a local bookstore? Because I feel like that is something that's so intimidating to so many authors.
So this is one area where thankfully I did have a relationship with a local bookstore already, and that paid off big time. So there was my book is set in Houston, Texas, and there's a local bookshop that's right behind the high school where my husband and I graduated from. So contacting this local bookstore that I had shopped at over the last 20 years that my mother and my mother-in-law both frequented, it was a really easy ask. And so that's where I would say your relationship is really important. So if there's a local bookstore near you that you're eyeing for a book launch, start hanging out there, start buying books there, start getting to know the staff. And so for me, it was a matter of sending one email and saying, hey, here I am. I'm launching my first book. Can I, and they were more than happy to have a special pre-order. They did sign book plates. They also did a Zoom event, which ended up being co-hosted with a New York Times bestselling author. So we kind of got to join forces on our audiences, which was really awesome. So I really loved connecting with a local bookstore for part of my launch. And I think that relationship was pretty key.
That's wonderful.
That's awesome. Yeah. I struggle with that because I don't like to talk to people.
At the bookstore, you like to go in and be quiet?
Anywhere. I don't like to talk to people anywhere. I go to the bookstore. I've been going for years, but I just like never talk to anybody. I'm like, no, I'm okay.
It's hard to volunteer that your book is getting published.
Yeah.
But I think if you don't say it, then people don't know it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some questions from Twitter. Was there anything we missed or anything else you wanted to talk about before we move to those questions?
I would just say generally, every author is different. Every book is different. So every launch is going to be different. And while it's great to look and see what other authors have done and what's worked for them, ultimately what's worked for you and for what's going to work for you and for your book is going to be very specific to your story and your situation.
Okay, so turning to Twitter, we got a few different questions. Jackie Amsden asks, when does the marketing for a book start? And I guess that really depends on your publisher, kind of like we talked about a little bit.
That depends on the marketing for your book, depends on the publisher, but you could also look at it that, I mean, as soon as you know you're writing a book, the marketing could technically start with having an author page and starting an email list and having your social media portals in place. So, I mean, I think the formal marketing might be determined by your publisher, but ultimately, as a writer, once you're on a writing journey, it's not too soon to start thinking about marketing.
Right.
I totally agree with that.
And forming relationships. I mean, that's kind of the earliest marketing before you even have anything to market.
So KJ Mitch, I'm going to try to say your name right. Mitchie. I like how, thank you for sounding it out.
No, because she has it on her,
I know it's
specifically
pronounced.
has it on her bio. Pronounced Mitchie.
Well, I didn't see that at first. And then I was like, oh, okay. What to post on Instagram if you're not a fan of putting photos of your kids up there?
If you're a writer, then you're writing words, and words can become images. So figure out Canva or whatever other software you're comfortable with and figure out how to turn your words into images. That plus any photos that you take in a author shoot or a book photo shoot, having those ready to go. Anything, like I said, anything that you already have ready to go is helpful, but also using your posts during the launch to focus on your inspiration for the book, or
that's a great idea.
Or the setting, or
the setting, right? The setting or the themes, and really, talking about the book. You can use stock photos to get people's attention, whatever you think will draw people in. But I'm with you that Instagram has been a struggle for me. I'm much more comfortable on Twitter, which just words.
Yeah, me too.
Heather asks advice on how to go about requesting endorsement quotes, so like blurbs from fellow authors.
So I think much like we've been talking about with targeting podcasts or targeting media outlets, the more focused you can be with your author ask, the better. So if I would say start with those relationships. If you already have relationships with published authors who you can reach out to, that's a great place to start. And also asking authors that could somehow benefit from their name being on your book cover or inside your book, or from being one of your social media posts. So thinking, who are your comps? Who are the authors that are going to genuinely be excited that your book is coming out into the world, and asking. And I would say, don't be scared to shoot for the moon on the author blurb asks, because you never know who's feeling generous the day that you ask and will say yes. Right. I had an author say yes that I was not expecting, and I really felt like it having her name and her following associated with my book really raised the bar for my whole launch. The other piece of advice that I would give is follow up, because she didn't write back. And so I actually messaged her on Twitter and said, "Hi, did you get my email?" And she said she did not. What I've learned is that if you're emailing authors through the contact me form on their website, I would say there's a 50-50 chance that they're actually going to get it.
I will also add to this, definitely shoot for the stars. I messaged someone whose book is a comp title for me, and she replied and she said, "I'm so sorry, I just do not have time, but if you send me images, I will promote it on my social media during your release week," which is like also awesome, so sometimes you might not get the blurb, but they might be, willing to be generous with their social media and time in other ways. Erin wanted to know if your publisher talked to you at all ahead of time about what kind of publicity they would provide.
So yes, the publicity that my publisher provided was talked about at the contract level. And what they did provide was some graphics, professionally made graphics to talk about the book, and also the big thing was a video trailer about the book. And that was really fun. I got to show that to my launch team on the book launch Zoom. I got to kind of debut the video, and also got to email that out to my email list, and it got people excited. So that was kind of the extent of it, though, for me, and what my press was going to do. And so that's why so much of the publicity fell on me.
Yeah.
Okay, but you had realistic expectations, it sounds like.
I did.
Penny asked how much time is spent on social media and marketing per day, per week, etc. What did you do?
I mean, it could be unlimited time that you spend marketing your book. I would say during the heart of the launch, it was a good 30 to 40 hour work week for me.
Wow.
Even once kids were home from school, I was still on my laptop. I was on my phone, sending emails, posting social media, taking pictures of the book once it was a thing. You know, all the tasks that you can fit
That's a
into a day,
lot.
I was doing.
Yeah.
So it can get a little crazy if you let it, or you can put up fences around. Okay, I'm only gonna work on my book launch while my kids are at school, and that's that.
I also have to say, I was thinking about this earlier, but you were talking. I love your backdrop there with like your sewing
I
machine.
know, I've been
and
looking at it too, and your book.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's I have this lovely. It's a dual workstation desk. So I have
Wow.
writing on
Ooh.
one side and I have sewing on the other, and
I love it.
it's
And
the
it's a cool
first time.
backdrop.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever had like designated spaces for both of my hobbies.
So
Nice.
I need to do
That
a
is
little bit more decor, but it's coming together.
It looks great. It looks like you like totally set it up just for
I know
like
it does. It does.
filming. It looks really wonderful. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. Is there anything that you're working on now that you can tell us a little bit about?
Sure. I do have a new work in progress. It has taken a really long time for me to get into it. I think the launch truly wore me out, and then we moved across the country and have been renovating a house. So it's been hard to get back into it, but I'm working on World War II historical fiction that's inspired by my ancestors.
Wow, that sounds really amazing. I love
That's
that.
cool. Yeah.
It's
Cool.
a lot of research to do.
I'll
That's
bet.
also what's dragging any kind of word count progress. But hopefully,
Yeah.
I feel like this story is starting to speak a little bit more, and I'm starting to get into the characters.
Yeah.
So,
That's a good
great
feeling.
spot.
It always takes me a while to get there.
All right. So Peyton, where can we find you online?
So I like to hang out on Twitter at Peyton Writes, and all of my social media is linked through my website, which is peyton-roberts.com.
Awesome. And can you tell us the title of your book again for anyone who plans on looking it up? And we'll also link it below.
Sure. It's called Beneath the Seams.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah,
today. This
thank you.
was such
That
a
was
fun
great.
chat, and I feel like I learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We have our every other Wednesday night chats. You can join anytime. We have writing sprints coming up, and you can find out more about, I don't know what I'm saying, more
You can
about
join our
Moms
email
Writers.
list.
Yeah, you can join our newsletter to find out about all of that stuff, or just find us on our website, all of which is linked down below. Thanks for joining us today. Please give us a like and a subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at author Jess Payne.
And I am at Sarah Reed Author. Thank you for
And we'll
joining
talk to you
us.
next time. Bye.
Bye.